Hi friends, this is your pal Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons being used for therapy, tabletop role-playing games being used for therapy, specifically in context to a panel that I attended at the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo, um, and it was battling your demons using RPGs for therapy. And I wanted to talk about my interaction in that, what I encountered in that panel, and what my thoughts are on RPG for therapy. All right, so first of all, this was an interesting panel. It featured Adam Erskine and Matthew McGibbon and his wife Heather McGibbon, and they presented what they're doing in using RPGs as therapy, which was quite interesting. So I think one they were like, hey, we're helping law enforcement, and the group of them talked about who they were helping, and they listed law enforcement officers who had lost friends along the line in service in law enforcement, veterans who had trauma and PTSD and anxiety, and then also people who suffered from who weren't law enforcement or veterans who were just trauma bound, like had PTSD but may not have served in law enforcement or got PTSD from some other trauma event, and people who had just been massively impacted by trauma, right? And we're working through like really serious PTSD, anxiety, and trauma issues, right? And so so I listened, and I was very attentive, but I have to say, the reason I went is auxiliary interest. And so let's get into this. I don't have any interest in RPG as therapy. And the reason why is I want to say I think it's a dead end, but I know, but actually one of the things I thought was interesting was Adam Erskine really showed it was real, right? So one of the things, he had a couple of his patients there who talked about the sessions they were in and how RPGs had helped them with their trauma, right? So it was real. Like there was evidence, receipts were presented that RPGs as therapy is happening, right? That it really is up and running, right? It's a thing that is occurring. And the reason why I talk about that is a friend of mine works in tech, and he talks about vaporware, right? Like that, for a long time, people will talk about tech before it ever really arrives. And I think we were there with RPGs as therapy for a long time too, where it was a lot of talk about it, and maybe it was happening here and there, but it's extremely rare. Now I think it's at scale, and like there's a lot of people doing this, and it's not even new, right? So I don't want to say it's a dead end. I think that's a little too far. I definitely think it's a cul-de-sac, right? You go around, you do a little loop, you come back out, and you leave it, right? It's not somewhere you stay, and I don't think it's overall useful, right? And here's why. It's just numbers, right? So first of all, the people they're helping, incredibly small numbers, right? So like, law enforcement with trauma, veterans with trauma, distinct groups, but very limited. Like, like this isn't a television show. Most people we know are not, veterans who have served in combat, law enforcement who have, suffered incredible trauma. That number of people is pretty rare, right? So and then you're like, wait a second, Scott, you're not just gonna write off law enforcement and veterans, are you? No, I'm not, right? Except this is what I'm saying, right? These are not underserved groups. These are massively served groups. For veterans, there is literally a Veterans Affair department. And so if we're going to come in and we're going to use, and first of all, one thing I don't like is it wasn't called Dungeons and Dragons for therapy. If it was, I would have been a lot more interested. In fact, I was shocked that one of the McGibbons use Pathfinder. I was horrified to learn this. And actually I want to keep this tight as a drum. I want to get to my point in here. So RPGs is therapy. My point is, the group, the groups they're serving are incredibly small, right? It's a cul-de-sac, and these are not underserved groups. There are huge, huge numbers of forces that of charities, NGOs, and organizations that are lining up to serve veterans. It's not an underserved group, right? In that, and I would even go as far as to say, is this needed there? Like, that is a very served group, right? Like, there are literally, I think there's well over 1,000 charities that serve. I'm positive there's over 1,000 charities, and those charities are serving above an entire government organization that is dedicated to veterans, right? So it's just, that is not an underserved group, right? So, bringing more care to care to care to care, okay, and then on the police, on the law enforcement side, that gets very interesting because everybody supports veterans, right? But the story has changed on law enforcement. It's not, we don't look at law enforcement the way we used to. There's an ongoing conversation, about, without exception, people are like, are veterans heroes? Yes, absolutely. That question has changed on law enforcement. That is a different open discussion, right? And frankly, I don't really think that we need to involve Dungeons and Dragons in that discussion. And at the same time, for all police departments, they have programs. There are special programs to aid them. So I just really feel like they're serving groups that are already very well served, or that the narrative has changed on, right? So why did I go, right? Well, that's a good question. So here's what I am interested in from an RPG as therapy perspective. So first of all, I'm not interested in our RPG as therapy. I'm interested in Dungeons and Dragons as therapy, right? I'm auxiliary interested in Dungeons and Dragons therapy, but only for one reason, right? Why? Well, the one thing that I like about these groups that are talking about RPG as therapy, they're acknowledging that these are tools, right? They're getting into the zone where, to me, I think, yeah, this is what I like. The idea of using a game to help someone with therapy is ludicrous, in my opinion. Nobody's like, hey, we're going to use Uno to help you overcome your trauma. We're going to use Candyland to help you overcome your trauma. And if somebody said that, I think people would laugh at them, right? But these groups that are coming in and saying, hey, we are thinking about using Dungeons and Dragons as therapy, that's I'm very interested in. And the reason why is when you say we're going to use this to overcome trauma, you're saying that thing isn't fragile, that it has power, and that you can put weight on it, right? And that is one place where I meet these people, right? I believe Dungeons and Dragons has the weight to improve people, right? I have no interest in using Dungeons and Dragons as therapy. I have massive interest in considering Dungeons and Dragons as a major element that can bear social, cultural weight, right? Intellectual weight, emotional weight, spiritual weight, and can be used to improve, to grow, or to transform people, right? Now, these groups, they're saying, oh, well, the only way we're going to help you is if you have trauma or PTSD or anxiety or some other checkbox that you'll find in the DSM, right? I want to be free of that. I don't need you to be broken, right? Or, I don't need you to have some, let's not use the term broken. I don't need you to have some, I don't need you to have a DSM checkbox in order to be helped. This is what I'm saying. I don't think that's fair. I think it's a cul-de-sac. You go in, you do your little loop, and you come back out, right? That's, you're helping an incredibly small group of people who already have lines, literally 1,000+ organizations that are trying to help them, and that's on top of government resources that are already dedicated, and not in small amounts, like in billions, right? So that's my point. Is I'm very interested in using Dungeons and Dragons to improve, grow, and transform people, right? But in order to even have that conversation, we need to get out of the Candyland space. We need to get out of the Yahtzee space, right? Nobody's like, oh, we're gonna, so you know, we're gonna put the weight of your trauma on Yahtzee, like, but when you start talking about Dungeons and Dragons, people are like, wait a second, yeah, there's something there. That's got weight, that's got strength, that's got a density that can support some things. Let's have this conversation. And so from that perspective, I really liked hearing from people who believe, well, and that was one problem, is actually at like Adam Erskine, Matthew McGibbon and Heather McGibbon aren't even using Dungeons and Dragons. They're using Pathfinder. And I don't like that. I think that's a very, very bad idea for a lot of reasons that I don't have time to discuss in this video, right? They're not, Dungeons and Dragons is not the same as Pathfinder. Pathfinder does not have the weight to bear any cultural, intellectual, emotional, spiritual. No weight should be put on Pathfinder. That is absurd, right, in my opinion. But Dungeons and Dragons, that's a different ballgame, right? I believe Gary built it to hold that kind of weight, and he gave a lot of clues to that. One of them was Dungeon Magazine. Every single Dungeon Magazine said mastering the dungeon and beyond. Gary was in the business of helping people to improve, to grow, and to transform, right? Nobody at Pathfinder ever cared about that. Are you kidding me? Right? Like they could barely copy D&D well. So to put somebody's trauma weight on Pathfinder seems absolutely absurd, in my opinion, right? And Adam Erskine was the same way. He was saying we use all kinds of stuff and never once mentioned D&D, right? So these guys weren't even using Dungeons and Dragons for therapy. They were using everything but, which I think that's, you know, come on, man. Like, use the, you know, like, you really want white label store bought, you know, like you want white label store brand. Like, if you're going to do it and use the right thing. Use the thing that's survived for 5 decades, right? So it was an interest. It was, it was a useful panel. It was a useful panel because it was nice to see that there are people who understand that a role-playing experience can bear intellectual, emotional, or spiritual weight. It can bear the kind of weight that is needed, that is significant. It can bear significant cultural, experiential weight, and that is fascinating. So I did have some, you know, some overall issues, you know, just with again, it's a cul-de-sac. So, and I want, and so if that's a cul-de-sac and I'm not interested in it, what am I interested in? I'm interested in an Autobahn, right? An open freeway that spans for, you know, 1,000 miles and everybody's going 90 miles an hour. And it's not just people who have a DSM checkbox, right? Like, it's for everybody. And that's, I think, where the rubber meets the road, where anybody who shows up at a D&D table can be helped. I really don't, I want to free Dungeons and Dragons from the idea that you need a DSM checkbox to be helped by it, right? And so then that's my take. That's my opinion. Every single word you heard in this video is my humble opinion. Nothing more, nothing less. The important part is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider subscribing and have a fetch millennium.